On this episode of A State of Control, we talk about security, cybersecurity, securing your network and your devices, and what it all means to the AV industry. All that and more on A State of Control.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
A State of Control.
A State of Control, episode 79, Cover Your Butt.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Extron, industry-leading technology backed by world-class support.
Welcome to A State of Control, an AVNation podcast that highlights the programming, control, and automation aspects of the AV industry. My name is Steve Greenblatt. I'm your host. Thanks for joining us today. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about a critically important topic that's been in the IT space forever, but only AV has taken notice to it, unfortunately, in just the recent past, and that's security and security of systems. And with me to discuss this are two returning guests, and I'll introduce them soon. But first, I want to say hi to my partner here at A State of Control. He's none other than Rich Fregosa. How are you, Rich? How are you?
I'm doing good. Mellow West Coast greetings. I was regaling you with stories of the adventures of Uncle Richie as Uncle Richie is learning to gold mine and possibly becoming a prospector. So it's always a new story with Uncle Richie, but I'm glad to be here. I'm glad to be back in civilization.
Stay tuned. There's your teaser for the next few episodes. And I'd like to welcome back two familiar guests. One is becoming, I would almost say, regular nowadays. And I'd like to say hi to Brian McGrogan from Verex. Welcome back, Brian.
Thanks very much for having me, Steve. It's great to be back. Can't wait to talk about this topic. It's going to be a fun one.
Absolutely.
And I think we should get Rich to split all his gold findings with us.
Well, how do you think we financed the show? And last but not least, he just joined us for his first time a couple episodes ago, but he's back for some more. And his name is James King from Stockton University. Welcome back, James.
Thank you for having me, Steve. I'm looking forward to this topic. As Brian said, it's going to be a good one.
Absolutely. So, let's just start by talking about the idea of cybersecurity and what that means. So, cybersecurity is becoming a real buzzword, and if we define it, in its broad term, it's defined as protecting systems, networks, and programs against digital hackers, pretty much. And cyber hacks come in many different ways and manners, and many times they're trying to get sensitive information or data and either causing problems for people, business interruption, or even to the point where they're exploiting people for money. I don't know that our industry is at that point, but we're only as strong as our weakest link, which I like to say, and we've told stories for years about how there's been vulnerabilities in systems where the hackers have gotten through on RS-232 port. So it doesn't really have to be something all that sophisticated. And I think we're all starting to look at now, how does security impact our world? Where is the industry going, and what are some of the policies and procedures we have to start to implement? So Rich, let's kick it off there. What does the AV industry need to do to get on board with this? And because we do want to be at the table with IT, so I think that this is something that is going to be critically important.
You have to take it seriously. We were right before we started recording. One of the issues, if someone comes to this industry from a non-IT field, right? IT security. That is just the de facto rule, hopefully. But if you come from a background other than IT and not being steeped in it, security is less of a concern because they've never had to deal with it. So what happens is it starts to butt in on their convenience. And once it starts to butt in on their convenience, they're reticent to change direction at that point. Case in point, because of all of the exploits that we've been seeing, especially over the past few years, and just because our industry is growing up and because we are becoming more connected to the greater network, to the greater corporate network, to the greater residential network, you're a flaw. Our systems could be a flaw in the overall network security. So what's happened is, fortunately, manufacturers are, California is a perfect example now. There are devices that the minute that you buy them and you plug them in and you log in, you have to establish a password and a login. By law, it's not even, hey, this is a great idea. It's you have to do this. This is what we've told the manufacturer that you have to do. So that's from a manufacturing standpoint, it's going to that point. Control systems manufacturers are starting to get that point as well. And I think what's going to happen is the same law that we saw in California will start to expand over the next few years. And so it is going to be, and of course, that flies in the face of somebody who's been used to, we were saying before, don't update firmware because it breaks it. And so you've got systems that are running 6-year-old firmware because it's always worked and I don't need to fix something that isn't broken. We have to adapt with the times, but that does mean changing your approach to things. And so that is a hard thing because I get calls all the time, from integrators or from techs in the field. Well, why do I have to do this? Well, because it's secure, because this isn't your place. You have to make sure that, this is closing the windows and locking the doors. So thanks, Alexa. I appreciate it. I didn't know you were guest starring. Case in point, she was listening in. She was making her voice known. I think that at the biggest key right now is the hardest part is not the technology and the security. The hardest part is the humans. And how do we get the humans to take it seriously?
If I might, Steve, add to that. So what Rich and you both talked about is Hollywood depicts a hacker as this evil villain in a dark basement, hood over their head. You can't see them. They're in command line getting into your system. That is not true. Hackers are very social. They are doing social engineering. People are your weakest link. Look at Twitter hack, where what they did was they got admin's password by social engineering or phishing attempts. And they got in for that way. They did not go through some backdoor or anything like that. They went through people. People are easy to crack. And like Rich says, everyone doesn't want to be inconvenient, but security by nature is inconvenient. If it's hard for you, it's hard for somebody else.
Yep, and you make a good point there too, James, and both you and Rich, the convenience factor, right? If it takes me 10 minutes longer to set something up, it also means that I need to document it. I need to remember it. So, we do need to adjust our approach as an industry and as people and understand that we are only as good as the weakest link, and we don't want to be the weakest link, right? So we want to make sure that we adjust our approach properly to ensure that we are following the best practices in security to make sure that we are not the weakest link.
Yep. As I say, is when I started securing the AV equipment, I had some people ask, "Oh, well, why are you doing that?" And I turn around and go, "I don't want my InfoSec manager coming to me saying the university was hacked by one of your equipment. So I'm going to do what I can to protect us." And that's how I look at it.
And not even just that, right? That small time investment right then and there, and going and taking the understanding of it. You deploy a campus, right, with 100 different spaces, or however many number of spaces, and in 6 months, InfoSec comes back and says, we identified this vulnerability because you didn't secure your devices. Who eats that time to go back, right? Is that on you? Most likely, right? And now you've got to go hit all these spaces. So let's do it right the first time, right? Let's make sure that we're doing it right away.
Yeah. definitely doing it right the first time saves long run.
Yes.
So I thank you guys for that, and there's tons of ways that we can follow up on that. I think we touched on a couple of important things. One is that it's inconvenient, and two, it takes longer, and as we know, we were always judged on how long something takes and being able to do your job easily. So, James, I'll let you take this one from your perspective, because you have a special role. You are a control programmer, but you also work at an institution. So you kind of wear both hats. You want to make sure you're protecting your organization and people are following the rules, but you also have to be subjected to them yourself. So how do you explain this to people in terms of I want to be able to give you this compromise of maintaining security and getting the job done? What does that look like in terms of how does that translate to AV and what we do?
So I look at it kind of as multi level. Is really our end users in my field in higher ed. Our end users are our students and faculty members. They shouldn't be inconvenient to a certain point. So when they walk in, they should be able to turn on the projector, load up the computer, and do what they need to do. But we also got to make sure they can't throw in a keylogger onto the computer, or plug in a device into a open network port and getting access to the network. So there are procedures to protect against that. But on AV side, they should be very easy to come in, use the system, because like Brian said, we did the work first and took the time to secure it. So on the back end, my techs, when we're working on the back end, we have to make sure we're authenticating into the system to make any changes. Any changes are logged. We have a ticket system. Like, that's where the inconvenience is for us. Our tech can't just go in and make a change. They have to go into it. They also have to be the right level tech to get into the right area to make the changes.
You actually brought up a really good point there too, James. Physical access, right? Having a switch installed in a rack and an empty network port up front, right? You may just be able to plug right into that with your laptop or with whatever after the professor's left the room. And then you have access. So thinking about that aspect of it too, right? Disabling ports or making sure the ports have authentication on them, etc.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. We talked about this before on another podcast where it was 802 1X and the PNAC, and that's your network team should be rolling that out if they haven't already. And you should have an idea of how PNAC works with your authentication, or like Brian said, disable ports. So when you plug in, nothing works unless it's authorized.
Yep.
So Brian, I'll let you take this one because we're all kind of in the same boat in that we have a job to get done, and having access and especially these days, remote access, and we talked about that in a previous show is critical, but yet security comes into play there. What steps can we take, or what are our options to be able to support our clients and be able to handle security or be observant of security or compliant, let's call it?
So I think the biggest thing right up front when you sent me over the outline, Steve, was it has to be a dialogue, right? It has to be a dialogue with the customer right from the very beginning. And we want to understand, one, that we want to let them know that we want to understand their security needs, and that we're going to do everything we can do to meet them. But we also need them to understand, like you said, we do need access at some level. And especially in today's age, we do need remote access as well. So getting those pieces started right up front. I know for a bunch of different clients that I've worked for, I've got to fill out 20 pages of documents in order to get remote access. And then I end up going through a background check, sometimes even a credit check, just to get that remote access. So starting that up front, identifying those pieces is really key. And then staying on top of it once we have that, right? We don't want to to lose that trust, right? Just because maybe, again, we come back to convenience. I'm not going to share my login with someone else on my team just because they haven't been approved yet, right? I'm gonna suck it up, and it may be 9 o'clock on a Friday night, but I'm gonna jump on and I'm gonna help, and if I have to be the eyes and the ears, I have to be the eyes and the ears. So, coming up with that strategy and ensuring that, one, as a person, I can understand what needs to be done too, but also then looping back in our teams to make sure they understand, right? So the next time we take this project or the next time we do this, we need to start these steps, 2 weeks earlier to make sure that those things don't happen. So there are a lot of different angles to that and the way that it can work.
And Brian, I think you really made a good point there, is not just not sharing your password with your teammates, but not even sharing your device. You might connect VPN to a client's site and then be like, okay, I gotta step away. And your coworker goes, I gotta check my email. But now they have access to your client's site, which they may not be allowed to. So that is another whole thing, is making sure your devices are not being compromised just to get into a site that you have access that other people don't.
Yep, absolutely. And again, that comes down to a dialogue, right? Of, I may be the main support for a certain client, but I also need to have a backup, right? It can't just be one person that has access. So, you need to do everything you can do to make sure we're being compliant with security, making sure the client is happy and secure, but also doing the piece we need to do on our end to make sure that we can support them in a timely manner.
Totally agree.
Rich, I'll let you kind of give us the angle from your worlds, where you're not only handling these corporate situations where you have to comply by the rules, but you're also of another organization, but you also are working in people's houses and residential situations where you kind of almost have to make the rules to keep them safe. How do you go about that? And what responsibility do we have there?
Well, what's funny is when James and Brian were just talking, in a home, you can't hide behind company policy as the end all be all, right? I want to do this company policy. Can't do it, right? I can't hide behind that necessarily. And so again, and I think one of the things that we've always talked about is there are concerns from a technician and from a programmer standpoint, from an employee of a company, but there are bigger concerns for the owner of a company, and it's liability, and it's like insurance, right? Nobody ever needs it until something goes bad. Security is the same thing. Nobody talks about security until something goes bad. And then at that point, you have to have your butt covered. I mean, there's no other way to say it, man. You got to cover your butt from that, because like we were just talking about what you just said, Steve, you don't want to be the weak link. You don't want to be the one holding the bag, because a couple of things happen. Either you have time that you have to put in to cover your tracks to make sure that everything is compliant again, or you are potentially financially liable for a loss. And that is something that becomes more and more widespread over time. In Resi, I think we're getting a little bit of a helping hand with kind of the bigger companies out there with just something as simple as two-factor authorization. 2FA right now is something that is inconvenient as heck, but we push it because, again, 10 years ago, yeah, you're dealing with sensitive information from a company standpoint. And then I'm dealing with the C-level execs that I have their credit card numbers, their social security numbers, their passwords, and the codes on how to get the passwords. I mean, that's stuff that we're holding, that we held, that we don't hold anymore because it is not safe. We should not be entrusted. But again, these are people from the convenience factor. I can't tell you over the past 15 years how many times I would get a call on a Saturday night. What's my password for this? It's like, what, literally, they don't know their security information, and they would call me and we'd be the gatekeepers. Now, fortunately, and I think that 99.99% of the companies out there are ethical, and they understand that when they are dealing with sensitive information, to do everything they can to protect it and to hold it in a secure location. And we do that, making sure that you don't store, people's passwords and stuff in a Yahoo Mail account or something. I mean, it's just making sure that stuff like that at least has that first layer of defense. We are more and more reliant on 2FA for a simple reason. And our response is, look, it's important to me that you know when I'm accessing your system. I want you to be aware of when this happens, because you can decide whether or not, is it inconvenient? Might you be in a meeting? Do I have to wait 30 minutes for something else or wait until tomorrow? Okay, that's fine. But I'd rather have that inconvenience than for the barn doors to be completely open and for anybody and everybody to be able to get in. Not to say that I wouldn't have an employee who left the company and they were just curious, to be able to get it. People aren't necessarily malicious at times. People are just curious. And so, like James was saying, it's not somebody sitting back there with a cloak on there. It's just somebody who's kind of bored and goes, oh, hey, I wonder if that house that we connected to 3 years ago, I wonder if I can still see the cameras at the pool. Or, oh, hey, I've got a new girlfriend. I want to show her this job that I did a couple of years ago. I mean, that's how those stories occur. And then what happens is that their internal IT or somebody happens, or something gets posted, or a snapshot on social media gets posted of the interior of somebody's house, and they're showing off their artwork. Well, their insurance policy states that cannot be retransmitted. Those are the things, the real world things that happen. And as from a liability standpoint, those are the ones that you get dinged for. Where again, with 2FA or with anything else, even with basic VPN or remote access, right? If you change your password or a VPN, you get a key. You have to re-authenticate with a trusted source. If nothing else, at least there is there's the trail of crumbs to be able to go back and go, oh, hey, wait a minute. That Mac ID is somebody who worked for me 3 years ago or anything like that. So, the tools are there. The process is necessary. The inconvenience is irrelevant. And that's the way that we look at it at this point. It's just the nature of dealing in today's world. And a couple of, before we started recording, we talked about exploits from, the cameras. Their Dyna does it. You can buy a $69 internet connected camera. Those are exploits. Do you want to be the one that, again, on somebody's social media page or whatever it happens to be, it's snapshots from homes? Whether or not they know the identity of the person or that home, the fact is that you might be part of that exploit. And so those are the things that we consider, and we look and we go, we don't want we don't want to open that up, especially now when the tools are there to keep at least that first layer of defense.
It's funny actually you mentioned that, Rich. I don't know how often you guys watch TV. There's a show out there that wife and I enjoy watching called 911. And they actually did an episode where they kind of they didn't talk about security in general itself, but the issue happened was a guy's ex-girlfriend logged into his smart home and messed with him, causing him to fall, knock his head down, and he called the 911 to have him rescued. But all he did was log into his smart home to mess with him, changing the temperature of his shower, turn the lights on, turn them off, all that stuff. That's scary stuff that like people can do. And thinking about what people who really want to come after you and what they can do. I still talk about the one Japanese pop star who she was very concerned about her privacy. So when she took selfies and stuff, she made sure nothing was in the background that could identify where she was. One of her crazy stalker fans would zoom in on her eyes and get the reflections off her eyes and tracked where she lived.
Wow.
Yeah.
I another comment on what Rich said too, from a business owner's perspective, which, Rich and I kind of share, have our respective businesses, is that cyber security insurance or cyber insurance is becoming a bigger thing that we're starting to see in contracts, and it's a real thing. I mean, all the things that you just said, Rich, those are all serious, and somebody who has money and wants to litigate is going to come after you if you leave them vulnerable. And I think it all speaks to responsibility. We're coming close on time, but I did want to touch on one thing that we had wanted to talk about, and that's the SolarWinds compromise. And I want James to take this. But SolarWinds is software that is used to monitor networks and systems and to be able to get data, and it's a IT tool that was hacked into. So James, tell us a little bit about those types of implications and what that could mean to us.
Yeah, not to go down the whole rabbit hole of SolarWinds. If you don't know about SolarWinds, it's everywhere on the internet. You can look that up. But where that lies with us is the exploit from SolarWinds came from a trusted source. So SolarWinds was compromised. These people threw backdoors in, and when their SolarWinds clients went and did the normal updating like you're supposed to from a trusted source, they were actually becoming vulnerable because of that exploit. And that's where, like we were talking earlier before recording, is we don't want to become that. We need to continue to be that trusted source as programmers, and all that stuff is when we put things out in our clients' places, they're not having those backdoors, that they are trusted sources. So we got to protect our end to make sure that we're protecting our clients as well.
And you bring up something there, James, that Rich also touched on too, right? Is that came from the inside, right? And it could be as simple as, I needed to install this application on my PC in order to work on, this one piece of hardware, and that version there's an exploit in, right? And while I was at home, it did nothing. As soon as it detected some sort of corporate network, out it goes. So, it is being very conscious of that yourself as well. And, just stopping for a moment and thinking, what am I about to do? Just take that extra moment, take that extra minute. While it is an inconvenience, it's an inconvenience that's necessary.
Yep. And like Brian mentioned earlier, and even with the SolarWinds thing, is one of the steps they've taken afterwards was, I don't think they publicize their clients anymore, because now their client list becomes a target. Just like Brian's mentioning, is you look at some of these firmware releases and you read the file, which I strongly suggest everyone read before doing anything. They don't mention what security bugs they fix, because if you don't update it, those firmware versions become targets. So you're kind of protecting your clients by not saying what they're vulnerable to by running certain old firmware.
I think we're going to have to leave it there, but I think that this has the potential for a follow-up episode. So I'll tease that, and we'll and stay tuned for more, because this is a great topic. And I think, today we talked a lot about best practices, and I think that we can follow this up with talking about actual, tactical strategies that we can do, and also some of the impact too, because even when it comes down to device control, which we really didn't get into as much today, more and more manufacturers have to be aware of this, and many of them are starting to implement different forms of security, whether it's secure connections or TLS or tokens or OAuth. And these are all, some of these are new terms to a lot of people, and it's something that we should probably get into a little bit. So stay tuned for that. But I'd like to thank you guys for the great conversation today. This was a wonderful episode, and I think a good education, very valuable to a lot of people. First, I'd like to start with Brian McGrogan from Verix. Brian, thanks for being here today. How can people get in touch with you and learn more about Verix?
Well, thank you very much for having me, Steve. I this is such a great topic to talk about, and I could have gone on for hours on it. So you can find me, B. McGrogan, on social media, B. McGrogan at Varix.com. And you can find Varix on the web at Varix.com as well.
Very good. Thank you. Next, James King from Stockton University. How can people find out more or get in touch with you, find out more about what you're doing? And I know you're doing a lot of things in a lot of channels. Very active on social media as well as with HETMA. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit as well.
Yeah. First, thank you, Steve, for having me. And like Brian said, this is topic we can talk all day. In fact, it seems like every avenue I've been on where we have a security talking, we always are cut short before we get to the meat of things because it's so in depth. But you can find me on Twitter at AV_James King. I am on LinkedIn, but not as active there. I also write for the higher education digital media. I do an IT and AV column where I talk about AV and IT and hopefully more security stuff coming from that as well.
Great. And that's higheredav.com?
Correct.
Excellent. And last but not least, Rich, another great episode. It's always great when you and I don't have to do all the talking, right?
I'm telling you, these are my favorite episodes when I can sit and just kind of drink from the font of knowledge from these two, from our guests. And yeah, I mean, my feeling about this is always, if you think you don't like getting yelled at because a projector doesn't turn on, you don't want to get a call because you were the weak link in the cybersecurity. That's the way that I look at it. I'm like, if you don't like those bad news calls and getting yelled at, imagine that kind of call. So if you want to avoid that kind of call, listen to what these guys were talking about, because it is not the exception anymore. With that said, when we talk about it in part 2, 3, and 4, I would love for you to find us back here. You can find me personally on Twitter at rfregosa. You can find the company at Fregosa Design. But first and foremost, as I will always say, I would love for you to find us here on AVNation.tv, here on the State of Control or other suite of shows, Resi Week, AV Week, and all the other verticals that we hit. That would be the best place possible, and even better if you would find a way to support our sponsors.
Can't say any more than that. Thank you, Rich. I'd like to add another show that's just gone through its reboot called The IT Factor, and I'm actually going to be on that with Frank Patakala coming up. So check that out, and it probably would be a nice complementary piece to this discussion. So if you're interested in that, Frank gets really in deep with IT and AV. So check that out as well. Please reach out to Rich and to me, and we want to hear from you. I know that there's a lot of people listening, and I hope more and more each day, but we'd love your feedback, whether you can comment on our posts or just send us a note. It's great to know that people are listening, but it's also great to know what people want to know more about and what they like and don't like about what we're doing. So check that out. Reach out to us at AVNation.tv and also all the social channels. If you want to reach me, it's simply at Steve Greenblatt on all the social platforms, or my company, Control Concepts, which is at controlconcepts.net. Other than that, we've hit our limit for today on A State of Control. Thanks for being with us.